Isaiah Stewart has been fantastic for the Detroit Pistons. Despite the fact he's been playing in somewhat limited minutes, he is having what I believe to be a career year. We'll talk about how great he's been in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Also, make sure you guys are heading over to LockedOnDaily.com, typing in your email, and you will get a Locked On Pistons daily newsletter along with your Locked On Pistons daily podcast. A little later, should the Detroit Pistons be interested in Zach LaVine? And should the Detroit Pistons try to get Marcus Sasser some more minutes? We'll talk about that a little later. Stay tuned. But I do got to let you guys know this. We are trying to get to 10,000 subscribers as soon as possible. We are just 1,000 away. A lot of you guys who watch and listen to the podcast are not subscribed. So please, if you want to find the best way to help support me and help support the podcast, please head over to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button. It truly would mean the world. Thank you so much. It's the best way to support the podcast. But let's go ahead and get into how great Isaiah Stewart has been for the Detroit Pistons. Now, Isaiah Stewart has not started any games this year for the Detroit Pistons. He has been operating in somewhat of a limited role. So therefore, his overall numbers, his overall box score numbers, has not been like eye-popping. He's averaging 6 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, around 2 assists a game. You know, it's again, he hasn't been playing a ton of minutes, so the raw box score numbers are not going to wow you. But I think Isaiah Stewart is having his best season of his career, and I don't think it's particularly close. Not only do I think that, I think part of it has to do with the fact that he's playing in a role that has been great for him. They finally have him playing as the 5-man. They're not trying to force him as a power forward. They're not trying to force him as someone that needs to have the ball in their hands and attack closeouts and to be able to do all these things that 4 men in 2024 now do. They have him playing as a 5-man on defense and on offense, which I think that is really helped him a ton this year. So I want to give props to JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon for realizing that and has stopped doing what past regimes have been trying to do. And I want to correct something. He has started 2 games this year. Those were the 2 games that Jalen Duren missed. But you guys get what I'm saying. He's only averaging 21 minutes a game, which is his lowest since his rookie year. So, how is he having the best season of his career? Well, this year he's shooting 55% from the field, which would be a career high. He's slightly better than he is his rookie year. Now, I have mentioned how I would like to see him shoot more threes after all this time developing it, which he has started to shoot them a little bit more as of late, but nowhere near enough and nowhere near at the efficiency that he was last year. But this year, he's shooting 62% on 2s. And if you go even deeper into those numbers, that's what really lets you know that he's having a fantastic year. If you go to last year, remember, this was something that we talked about on the podcast a lot. And it was one of my biggest gripes with Isaiah Stewart and why I had concerns about Stu somewhat. Actually, not last year, I'm sorry. Go to his second season, or third season, I would say, in the NBA. His third season, he really was struggling at the rim. 28th percentile, according to Synergy. He was in the 28th percentile at the rim, not very good. He was in the 32nd percentile in layups around the obviously layups at the rim. So 23rd percentile, not great. The following year, he went up a little bit this past season, but a lot of his attempts were outside the three-point line. This year, for the Detroit Pistons, he's rolling to the rim more than ever. He's been in the paint more than ever. And he's absolutely thrived doing so. At the rim this year, he's in the 69th percentile on layups. And as a pick and roll man, he is now in the 88th percentile. He's been much better this year as a pick and roll man. He's been much better this year as a finisher around the basket. And I even tweeted out a few clips of him having some difficult finishes that I don't think he would have been able to convert this past year for the Detroit Pistons. I think he's just been much better this year for the Pistons. And actually, Synergy just tweaked out. Those actually were not the correct numbers for this year. They're even better. This year, he's in the 93rd percentile as a pick-and-roll man. That's much better. That's why I thought I saw earlier. So 93rd percentile as a pick-and-roll man. And at the rim, he's in the 74th percentile. And on layups, he's in the 86th percentile, which Synergy all ranks as excellent. So in past years, Isaiah Stewart really struggled as a finisher, which really stopped him from being able to play most of his minutes as a five-man. They wanted a five-man to really roll to the basket and be that pick-and-roll threat with Cade. And he's done that a ton this year with Cade Cunningham. And he's finishing a lot more of these attempts this year than he ever has at any other point of his career. Not only that, that's offensively. Offensively, I think he's peaking at the right time in his career. He's playing much better around the rim. Obviously, like we just talked about, finishing been much better than any other time. Then you go to his defense. And I think he's even been better defensively this year than he has in other years. And we all know that Isaiah Stewart was already a damn good defender beforehand. He already was a good defender in previous years. But I think he's even been a better one this year because he's been around the rim much more. They've allowed him to protect the rim a lot more instead of having him at the four trying to defend other wing players. He hasn't been doing that full time. From now on, he has been nonstop as their best rim protector, and he's been fantastic at that. And you really start to feel it when you look at his on-off net rating. When he's on the floor, the Detroit Pistons have a 109.9 defensive rating. That is absolutely fantastic. When he leaves the floor, they have a 113.0 net rating defensively. They have a defensive rating, of 113.0, which is still okay. It's still good. But when he's on the floor, they are one of, if not the best defense in the league. Like, that's how they're playing when Isaiah Stewart is on the floor. He's been fantastic on both ends of the floor. It seems like he's really coming into his own. It seems like he's really accepting the role that the Pistons want of him, what he needs to do. And it doesn't seem like, I feel like over the last few years, there's been a lot of searching for what is Isaiah Stewart? What is he going to be for this team moving forward? What's he going to be for you guys? That's been what I feel like the Pistons have been asking themselves over the last few years. He's played the 5. He's played the 4. He's shot a lot of threes. He hasn't shot a lot of threes. Is he just a bruiser? Is he just a vocal version of Draymond? Like, is he what is he? There's certainly been things to like about him, but I don't feel like anyone's really, or at least the Pistons have really completely sold themselves on what exactly is Isaiah Stewart. And so far through 25 games, I think JB and Trajan Langdon both know this is what we want Isaiah Stewart to be. We want him to be our rim protector. We want him to roll to the rim, and we want him to be a much better finisher. We want him to be finishing around the basket. We want him to be better in the pick and roll, and we want him to defend the basket. And he's been excellent at all of those aspects of the game, which is why he should be the Pistons starting center right now. He is their best option. He has definitely outplayed Jalen Duren to this point, despite the fact that he's played in much less minutes. He's only playing 21 minutes again per game this year. He's played, him and Jalen Duren actually have played close to the same amount of minutes. Isaiah Stewart's played 544. Jalen Duren's played 550. So they basically are splitting time somewhat this year, which honestly is kind of shocking, but not, I guess maybe the more you think about it and you think about how the last few games JB has been taking Duren out and kind of rolling with Isaiah Stewart, I guess it shouldn't be that crazy. Jalen Duren is averaging 24 minutes a game. Stu's around 21. But either way, Isaiah Stewart's been fantastic this year. You're seeing it in the impact in the numbers on and off wise. You're seeing it in his numbers at the rim. You're seeing him as a pick and roll man. He's become a better screener. I still think he could be a better screener. It's not that he's a great one, but he's a better one, I'd say. He's been much better at catching passes on the way to the rim. Remember, his hands have always been something that he struggled with. And it's not that he has like Calvin Johnson hands now, but it's better than last year. He's receiving these passes and controlling most of them. And he's been, I don't think he's been a better athlete around the rim, but I think he has much better touch around the rim. You're seeing him finish in different type of ways instead of just trying to bully through guys. A lot of times you're seeing him floater it, you're seeing some hooks, you're seeing him use pump fakes, you're seeing him use his dribble around the basket to get into better positions. I think he's just a much better basketball player this year. I think experience has something to do with that, but obviously how much work he's put in the offseason to improve, I think he's done that. So I just wanted to give credit to Isaiah Stewart and how great he's been for the Pistons. They've been better with them on the floor. Their defense has been way better with them on the floor. He's been a way better finisher. He's been a much better rim protector than any other option on the Pistons team. And it's felt every single time you watch the games. When Isaiah Stewart comes into the game, you feel things change. You feel things turn in the Pistons' direction almost every single time he comes onto the floor. He should be the Pistons' starting center. He's been fantastic for the Pistons this year. So I don't care that he's only averaging 6 points, 6 rebounds, whatever, in limited minutes. This is the best year Isaiah Stewart's had in the NBA, and he's a better player now than he ever has been at any other point in his NBA career. So let me know in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at KukaHill. Do you guys agree with me? Do you guys agree that Isaiah Stewart has been great? If you do, let me know. And then if you don't, also present the argument for why, again, in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at KukaHill. When we come back, a name that has been floated to the Detroit Pistons, I'd say for over a year now, is starting to float back around again. Zach LaVine. Should the Detroit Pistons be interested in trading for the Chicago Bulls star this season? I'm a procrastinator. I wait till the last second with just about everything, and it often screws me over when it comes to purchasing tickets. But with Game Time, it absolutely saves someone like myself because they have last-minute deals all the way up, again, to the last minute, but also even sometimes after the start of the event. If you're looking to purchase tickets, Game Time is the best place for you to do that. You have all-in pricing. Toggling that feature will show the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Another great thing I love about Game Time is that you will see the view from your seat right within the app. No longer do you have to wait till you get to the game to find out if you have the best seats. No, Game Time lets you know before you purchase the tickets, and it's why I absolutely love Game Time. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, and your purchase is also covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Now, the Detroit Pistons are around 25-26 games into the season. It's over a quarter of the way through. December 15th is just about half a week away, 4 days, 5 days away, depending on when you listen to this podcast. It's coming up. And everyone knows that Zach LaVine. We'll get there soon. I'm getting ahead of myself. Everyone knows that December 15th is when certain free agents that signed this past season can be traded. That's when a lot of guys become more available, that, you lift off this inability to trade a lot of the players. A lot more, best way to summarize it, much more percentage of the league is able to be traded now after December 15th. Not everyone. Like, for example, I know people like Lauri Markkanen. He's not available to be traded this year because of when he signed this contract. But right now, it's a smaller percentage of people that can be traded. Once December 15th comes around, it launches way higher because a lot of players who signed contracts this past year cannot be traded, which now makes teams more active at the trade market. That's why you're starting to hear more trade rumors over the last week or so, because the time when that stuff starts to happen is coming soon. That now has people discussing, obviously, one of the names that people are waiting to see traded, Zach LaVine. And Bleacher Report over the last week had a trade that had Zach LaVine going to the Detroit Pistons. And obviously, everyone remembers last year when Zach LaVine to Detroit actually had a lot of noise. It had some legit noise, and there was a lot of talks and discussions about actually making that happen at the trade deadline this past year. Now, obviously, he went on to have surgery, which made every team not willing to trade for him at that time, and he ended his season. So obviously it didn't happen, and nothing happened in this past offseason. Teams still shied away from Zach LaVine because he did not have the greatest year that past year. So they wanted to see, is he more of the player that we've seen over the last few years? Or has the injury bug bit him and he's no longer that player? And obviously, which we'll get to in just a second, his contract. But so far this year, Zach LaVine, I think he's been absolutely fantastic. I don't know how, like, if you've watched the Bulls play, there's no way, I can't see how anyone would watch them and think, my God, he's been fantastic. He's shooting 50% from the field. He's shooting 43% on threes. Again, I'm going to say it again, 43%, a career high, on 7.7 three-point attempts. High volume, high makes, high percentage. He's shooting 57% on all twos. He's averaging 22 points a game. He has a true shooting percentage of 63.6%, which would be a career high. And he's doing this without taking up like incredibly high usage rates like he did in his prime years. Like with the Bulls, he was at 31% usage, 31% usage, 28% usage. This year, he's down to 25% usage rate. So it's not like he's taking the ball back to how it was back earlier in his career with the Chicago Bulls, where it was just him soaking up the entire, shot clock, or it's just him with the ball nonstop. He has the ball a decent amount, but it's not to like a crazy margin like it was earlier in his career. He's doing this as, I would say, a lot of it as an off-ball player, and it's just been incredibly efficient. He's playing exceptional. He's been fantastic for the Bulls. So now that he's been so damn good, and he looks like that player, maybe even better than the player that you saw in 2022 or in 2021, where he made the All-Star teams. Now it's talk of, okay, will teams want to trade for Zach LaVine now? And there was a recent report over the last week that suggested that teams are still shy about trading for him. I'm going to go out there and say that that's probably a lie. I'm not going to believe that report. I'm going to assume that that's some... I think there's a lot of posturing that goes on. Actually, I know that there's a lot of posturing that goes on, and teams want that value to stay low. They don't want to have to give up any type of assets for Zach LaVine. But I am almost 100% sure that this player will be traded by the trade deadline because he's damn great. He's really good, and someone's going to want him now that he's playing this way. So I do think he'll be traded by the trade deadline. The question is, should the Detroit Pistons want to trade for him? And here are the questions that need to be answered if you are discussing, if someone comes to the Pistons front office, like, okay, discussion for today, Zach LaVine, should we trade for him? This is what is going to happen within that front office meeting. The first thing you got to talk about is his contract. So let's talk about his contract. He's paid $43 million this year. Next year, he'll be paid $45 million. And then he has a player option the following year for $48 million. Better way to look at this year he's taking up 30% of the cap. The next year, he will be taking 29% up the cap. And then the following year, it goes down to 28% of the cap. The main thing that needs to be discussed, if you are discussing, if you're one of those people out there that want to go after Zach LaVine, or if the Pistons are having this discussion, what needs to be brought up is, okay, the goal of Zach LaVine, if you trade for him, is for him to be your stopgap. Do we view his contract short enough to be a stopgap? Because it's no longer, last year, you were looking at this contract as a 3-year contract. I still didn't view it, if you listened to the podcast last year, I didn't view it as that big of a contract, or not big, long enough of a contract to think you're stuck with them, but you're another year away from that. So now you only have 2 years left after this deal. By the time his deal goes up, he will be 31 years old. 31 years old in the year that his player option takes up. So it's not like he's going to be 34, 35. He should be fine at 31 years old, I would assume. He still should be a pretty good player at 31. That's not ancient anymore in the NBA years. But either way, my overall point is that it's not that long of a contract anymore. However, is those 2 years, is that short enough of a contract to consider him a stopgap? Because anyone the Pistons acquire, I think, they don't want to tie long-term money into them. Which is why I don't think you're going to see them trade for a guy like Brandon Ingram, because you have to commit 5 years worth of money to him because he wants the max. 2 years after this year, not too much. Not too much. Especially in the final year, if he's a player option, he's playing this well, I think you could then even trade him in the final year of his contract. So, I think that's short enough to think about going after him, but still, that is a lot of money. And do you want to commit that type of money to him, despite the fact there's only 2 years after that? There is also a 15% trade kicker that will kick in after you acquire him. So you do have to take that into account. You are paying a lot of money to have Zach LaVine. It's for a shorter period of time that I think people can understand, but it is a lot of money. Do you want to commit that type of money to Zach LaVine? That's the first question you got to answer. The second thing you got to look at is, would Zach LaVine fit with Cade Cunningham? I think that's the main question. I think Cade has played to a point where the main thing that Pistons front office needs to be considering, does he fit with Cade? And I talked about this on the Pistons Pulse with Bryce Simon and Amari Sankofa. They both agree. They think Zach LaVine probably is the best type of archetype next to Cade, which is a guy who can thrive off ball, who is a pure scorer, and is not really going to need to take the ball out of his hands that much. He will take the ball out of his hands, but not take it out of his hands to the point where you're asking him to take up all the playmaking reps. This is still a guy that's going to thrive off of Cade. This is a guy who is in the 78th percentile on spot-up opportunities. Or not 78th percentile, I'm sorry, 83rd percentile in spot-up opportunities. He's absolutely fantastic off ball. In transition, he's in the 85th percentile. On catch-and-shoot opportunities, he's in the 93rd percentile. I mean, seriously, this is one of the best shooters in the entire NBA. Like, top percentile shooter in the entire NBA. I mean, on guarded catch-and-shoot threes, 83rd percentile. Like, this is a dude who absolutely thrives off ball. Thrives playing next to another playmaker, and I do think there's something to be said for him playing this well, playing next to a playmaking point guard in Josh Giddey. I'm not gonna say act like I've watched every single game of the Bulls, but I've watched some, and I can't help but feel like that has something to do with it as well. But also, this is another guy you can trust to score with the ball in their hands. This is someone the Pistons desperately need someone who can have shot creation, who can create for themselves and others, and Zach LaVine can do that. In the pick and roll, he's in the 75th percentile. In isolation, he's in the 85th percentile. He can score in just about any way possible. You can put the ball in his hands, and he will go score the basketball. And that's what the Detroit Pistons desperately lack right now. So does he fit next to Cade? Yes, I would say yes. The third question is, can you play him, Cade, and Jaden Ivey together? That's when it becomes a little bit tricky. Offensively, yes, I think you can do that. Defensively, it gets tricky, not because of size, but because they're not going to be, I wouldn't say they're technically small, but if you have Cade guarding threes and your two guard options are LaVine and Ivey, those aren't the greatest point of attack defenders you'd like to have on guards. It's just not great. Now, the current situation is THJ and Jaden Ivey, so it's better than that because of what Zach LaVine can do, but I don't know if that's something the Pistons want to commit to, like, more than this year, of having like that kind of guard play on defense at the point of attack, but it's definitely something to consider. And then the last thing that obviously should be considered, if you have any interest in trading for Zach LaVine, what's the price? I think the price probably has gone up from last year. Last year, it sounded like you could get picks with him. I don't think that's going to be the case. He's playing too well. Despite what you think of the contract, despite the 15% trade kicker, he's playing too well right now for the Bulls to consider moving picks with him. I highly doubt that's going to happen. They're going to want something for him. Now, whether it's great value or not, it's not going to no longer be like we have to attach assets with him. I don't see the Bulls even considering that at all with how well he's playing. So what's the value? For me, I have a level of interest in LaVine that I would peek around and I would have negotiations about it. But if you have to give up Jaden Ivey, I'm not doing it. If you have to give up Ron Holland or Asar Thompson, I'm not doing it. Those guys are completely off the table. I really don't even want to give up anything of much of value at all for that contract. I'd give up a few second-round picks and maybe like I don't want to go into a full trade here because I know how that goes. That's gonna, people are gonna lose their minds over the trade I make, and I'm not trying to do that yet. I'm really not trying to do that yet. However, I will just simply say this. My point is, I don't think you should be giving up a lot of value for him because he does have a crazy contract. Despite how great he's been this year, he does still have that injury history that is concerning. And look, even though it's only 2 years after this, that is a decent amount of time still you're committing to him. So it's not a long time, but it's not an expiring contract basically. So I'm still not giving up a lot of value for him. If you can get Zach LaVine for like a few second round picks and maybe a piece or there, like, sure, but none of your top assets. I'm not trading multiple first. I'm not even really trading one first probably for him. So if the value's right, I do think the Pistons should be interested in him. He is a great player who is having a great season. He's been fantastic. But even with that, I do think he would fit. Yes, he would fit. I think he'd help the Pistons immensely. But the money, the trade kicker, and the injury history still has it to where, yes, I'd give more than I would have given last year, but I'm still not giving up top value for him. I'm not doing that. I'm not interested in doing it. So let me know in the comment section down below. Are you guys interested in going after Zach LaVine, and what would you give up? Also, the other thing that I didn't bring up, I should have brought up, it just depends where you look at the Pistons at. That's a lot of the disagreements in the Pistons community right now. Are you trying to win games? Are you just not tanking, but semi, what's the word? Kind of coasting this year with development? Do you want to take another step? Are you cool with waiting? Do you want to make the play-in this year? Do you just want to go to the offseason, get to the draft again, have another top pick? Where exactly do you think the Pistons are at right now? I think that determines it as well. Because if you're not really worried about winning still, then you probably don't do this if you're not trying to win no more still. But if you want to win, you want to take another step, and you think Cade's ready, and you want to try to make the play-in and make the playoffs, etc., then I think this is something you should consider. But take all that into consideration. Should the Pistons be interested in Zach LaVine? Let me know. Comment section down below or over on Twitter @KukaHill. When we come back, should Marcus Sasser be getting more minutes that he's getting? Should JB Bickerstaff find a way to get Marcus Sasser more minutes? We'll talk about that when we come back. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And as I've told you guys many times before, I started using FanDuel a few years ago, and I have not turned back since. I still use it to this very day. It's super fun to use, super easy to use, super self-explanatory, but obviously, most importantly, it's super fun to use. And you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch, and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel @Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Marcus Sasser, a player who I think has been pretty controversial in the Pistons community. Not heavily, because he's just, he's a bench player. So I don't think it's not something that's been talked about nonstop with him. But I do think when he is brought up, you can get a wide variety of opinions about him. Nonetheless, I think he's been pretty good for the Pistons this year. In the limited amount of minutes he's played, I think he's been pretty damn good. He's shooting 54% from the field, almost 41% from deep. He's averaging 6.3 points a game in his 13 minutes of action. If you were to go per 36 minutes, he's averaging 17 points a game, 53, 40, 100% from the free throw line, but 17 points a game in per 36 minutes if you want to see what it would look like, with more usage, more time, etc., etc. Get a better understanding of that. Also, the team has been better when Marcus Sasser's on the floor. Yeah, the on-off difference with him is plus 2.0. So, and I think that matches the eye test as well. He's been pretty good for the Pistons. I think one of the main reasons why he's looked good in recent minutes for the Pistons is he's not the sole ball handler on the floor. When he's been the sole ball handler on the floor in his rookie year, in the Summer League, and earlier this year, he doesn't look good because he's not a point guard. That has been something we have talked about nonstop on the podcast. He is not a point guard. However, if you can play him off of one of these guys, and I feel like Marcus Sasser knows this as well. Like in his opening press conference, the first thing he said was, I'm a guy who can play off of Cade, Jaden, I can play off of ball handlers. I can play off of point guards. I can score the basketball. I can shoot the basketball and space it for him. He knows what he's best at. Marcus Sasser knows what his role is in the NBA. I feel like everyone knew that besides two people last year for the Detroit Pistons. Those two names will not be named anymore. But the Pistons have been playing him next to a Cade, next to a Jaden Ivey. And he's looked good in those minutes. So should he be given more minutes by JB Bickerstaff? Yes and no. The problem that you're running into here is that who are you not playing then? That's the question. Who are you sitting for him? Because you got Cade and Jaden Ivey. You don't want him to take up the backup point guard minutes. That's the problem. If Marcus Sasser is going to take up the backup point guard minutes, then there's an easy solution to playing him. You just play him instead of staggering Cade and Ivey all the time. But you don't want to not do that. You want to stagger Cade and Ivey, and you want them to be. You don't want Sasser's minutes to be as a point guard. That's the whole problem. So really, what you're trying to find minutes for, you're trying to find minutes next to Cade and Ivey. And the problem with that is Malik Beasley's taken up a lot of those minutes, and he's been fantastic. And THJ is taking up a lot of those minutes. And he's been, I wouldn't say fantastic, but he's been about what you've expected out of him. So how are you going to get minutes from Marcus Sasser? That's the problem. That's the problem that you're going to run into. And I don't really know how you solve this, because you're definitely not taking minutes away from Malik Beasley. It's not happening. And THJ is currently in the starting lineup. And honestly, the person that's probably going to take most of THJ's minutes eventually is going to be Asar. So I don't really think that, I don't feel like he's going to be trying, like, the player to cut into his minutes isn't THJ's. I think Asar is doing that. Unless you just take THJ completely out of rotation, which is not going to happen. I am not saying you're saying it should happen. THJ's been, I think, honestly pretty good for the Pistons. I know that he was catching a lot of flack before the year, but to really be honest, I think he's been mostly fine for the Pistons this year. I'm not going to sit here and act like I've not been, cool with him. He's struggled a little bit since returning from that head injury. I'm not going to hold that against him. That head injury was pretty, it was pretty bad. So I'm not going to hold that against him, but still, he's shooting 35% of 5.2 attempts from deep. I think he's been largely fine. But the problem is that Sasser's been good enough to where you want to try to find minutes for him. Like when Cade and him have shared the floor, it's a small sample. It's only 58 minutes. But in minutes with Cade and Marcus Sasser, they have a plus 5.2 net rating. Their offense is 123.08 offensive rating. Again, playing next to a ball handler, you allow Marcus Sasser to help Cade be better because he's spacing the floor and has that gravity. And Cade makes Sasser better because he's creating for him and getting him easier shots and allowing him to just play his role as a scorer. He's looked good with when it's just him and Cade. He's looked good, and in the limited minutes that you've gotten him and Ivey, again, very small sample size, but everything with Sasser this year has been a small sample size. In 24 minutes of action with Ivey and Sasser, they have a plus 16.9 net rating. So it's very clear. You play Sasser next to Ivey and Cade, he's a pretty damn good basketball player. Which is why earlier in the year, I started the soft campaign of maybe you try to move Sasser and just do him a solid and let him go somewhere where you're going to see him play. Because I do think Marcus Sasser is an NBA player. I do think he has a role. I do think he's a good enough shooter, a good enough scorer, a good enough self-creator to be an off-the-bench scorer type that you play next to a ball handler. I do think that's the case for Sasser. But the Pistons, one, I don't really see the cleanest role forward for that. You're not going to lose minutes to Malik Beasley. You're not really going to be cutting into THJ's minutes. It's hard. I don't really see the pathway forward. So I agree that his play has warranted more minutes. Yes, it has. I think they've looked really good with him on the floor next to Cade and Ivey. I do think that. It's just I can think that, but also think I just don't see a way for them to do it. It's going to be tough. And the answer can't be give him backup point guard minutes because that's when he looks bad. You do not want him to take those minutes. He can't be that. He's not that. Have him play next to somebody and he looks much better. I just don't see the pathway there. So I'm interested to see how Trajan handles that because I have to assume they see how well he's played. He is an NBA player. This isn't like one of those guys the Pistons have drafted that is sitting on the bench and I'm questioning if they can play at the NBA level. That's not the case. I fully believe that Marcus Sasser can play at the NBA level. And I think he's been much better this year. I just don't know if that's going to be on the Pistons. I don't know if that's something the Pistons will be able to offer him. So I'm interested to see how this plays out moving forward. He is probably the most likely Piston I could see getting moved this year because there's just not a realistic role for him. And I can see another team looking at him and saying, that's a guy that we see playing well and we could use him. He's not going to be expensive. We think in an increased role, he could be pretty good for us. I can see that happening. But let me know in the comment section down below. Do you guys see a way forward for Sasser to get more minutes? Or do you think he's probably one of the more likely players to get traded on this team because of what I mentioned? Let me know. Comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers. Please help us out. Hit that subscribe button. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace out, everybody.